Welcome everyone to week 4 of this Traditions workshop and Tradition 4. My name is Tuija. I'm a recovered alcoholic, grateful to be sober and grateful that you're all here. And welcome to anyone who's new here. So Tradition 4 is about autonomy and what we've looked at over the last 4 weeks. Just a quick run through, obviously unity, Tradition 1, then we looked at leadership and the group conscience, the loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience, and the importance of an informed group conscience, and principles of rotating leadership in AA. 3, last week, the membership requirement, and that being the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. So we look at autonomy today. And I didn't even think to look up what does the word autonomy mean. So we'll come to that shortly. And again, what we've looked at in the last few weeks is that little diagram of the bookends, the 12 traditions overview. So Tradition 1 is why it works, the unity, then at the end of the bookends, how it works because of anonymity. And then the Traditions 2, 3, 4, and 5 relate specifically to the AA group, the heartbeat of AA. And so we're looking at group autonomy this week, group Tradition 4, and next week will be the primary purpose. And so Tradition 4, hang on, what's happened? So Tradition 4, the short form, each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. And it's really good. A lot of us, and I know I'm the same too, often in many meetings it's customary to read out the traditions, which is wonderful. But a suggestion, if you ever get the opportunity, maybe read the long form. Obviously, if you have that freedom or liberty in a meeting. Maybe if you're hosting in WIM, just throw in the long form every now and then. So the long form of Tradition 4, the long form gives us so much more information and gives us, just even in a short paragraph, a fuller explanation of what the tradition's about. So the long form of Tradition 4, with respect to its own affairs, each AA group should be responsible to no other authority than its own conscience. But when its plans concern the welfare of neighbouring groups also, those groups ought to be consulted, and no group, regional committee or individual should ever take any action that might greatly affect AA as a whole without conferring with the trustees of the General Service Board. On such issues, our common welfare is paramount. And so paramount meaning most important, number one consideration. Let's have a look. So this is from Language of the Heart, Tradition 4, as it appeared in the Grapevine, March 1948, pages 80 to 82. That's in my Language of the Heart. Some of the editions may have different page numbers. And I just want to mention there was something, I don't know if we, remembering the homework here is for you to go and read the particular tradition out of the 12 and 12. So assuming you've all been reading along, you've read Tradition 1, Tradition 2, Tradition 3 in the 12 and 12 as we've been going along. And there was that story about how the group conscience spoke. Thought it was a really good story. Bill W. was struggling to make ends meet. He saw other members getting sober, getting on their feet, doing well financially and so on. And I think it was it Charlie Towns or one of those doctors, Dr. Silkworth maybe, offered him a position as a lay therapist. Come on, Bill, we know that you're struggling financially. Why don't you come and work with us and we'll pay you? And this sounded like a great idea to Bill. And the words out of the Bible came to him, the labourer is worthy of his hire. He was pretty excited about this, went home. You know, there was some hungry alcoholics looking on in the kitchen as Lois was cooking. And if I remember rightly, Lois wasn't too impressed. And the group members were even less impressed. when Bill told them of his brilliant idea, and the group conscience spoke and said, we can't be paid for this stuff. We're going to wreck it. And the good is the enemy of the best. So that was just that little story about how the group conscience spoke. And there's a funny paradox. I was talking to a friend recently about AA, and she was laughing and saying, oh, no one can tell you what to do. No one can tell anyone else what to do. Yes, it's true in a way, but if I don't follow the rules, then potentially I'm signing my own death warrant. So make of that what you will. It sounds paradoxical and hard to understand sometimes, but maybe that's just the nature of spiritual things. Okay, so starting on from language of the heart. Tradition 4 is a specific application of general principles already outlined in Traditions 1 and 2. Tradition 1 states, each member of Alcoholics Anonymous is but a small part of a great whole. AA must continue to live, or most of us will surely die. Hence, our common welfare comes first. And so, again, we talked about sorry, not sorry, but the newcomer is not the most important person in the room, because nobody's more important than anyone else. The common welfare is the most important in the room, but individual welfare follows closely afterward. I think no other organisation lavishes as much individual care and attention on its members as Alcoholics Anonymous does. And Tradition 2 states, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. With these concepts in mind, let us look more closely at Tradition 4. The first sentence guarantees each AA group local autonomy. With respect to its own affairs, the group may make any decisions, adopt any attitudes that it likes. No overall or intergroup authority should challenge this primary privilege. We feel this ought to be so, even though the group might sometimes act with complete indifference to our tradition. For example, an AA group could, if it wished, hire a paid preacher and support him out of the proceeds of a group nightclub. Though such an absurd procedure would be miles outside our tradition, the group's right to be wrong would be held inviolate. We are sure that each group can be granted and safely granted these most extreme privileges. And I see there in the group process the right to be wrong, similar to, for me as an individual. No one's going to tell me what to do. They might strongly suggest things, and I may be a genius and learn from the experience of others, or I might have to have my own experience and learn things the hard way. And so groups as well collectively can have that right to be wrong and to learn from their experience. And continuing on from the reading, we know that our familiar process of trial and error would summarily eliminate both the preacher and the nightclub. Those severe growing pains, which invariably follow any radical departure from AA tradition, can be absolutely relied upon to bring an erring group back into line. And the green type there's just my own input. I've said sometimes groups fold for good reason. So often here in Perth, for example, you'll hear people announcing at meetings, oh, can people come along to the Johnsonville group? That meeting needs support. Well, if it's a struggling meeting and maybe it's not even a properly structured group connected to the AA service structure, maybe it needs to close for the sake of unity. But better to have one strong united group in an area than 3 or 4 small struggling groups where there isn't enough unity, there's too many vacant service positions and so on. And as we go through the traditions, particularly next week at our primary purpose, Tradition 5, and our singleness of purpose, will see the value of a united and strong group. So sometimes I think if a group is struggling and it's on the verge of closing, great, let it die. But, people are allowed to have their own ideas, and you'll have people showing up alone, one person, to continue keeping a meeting open. And who am I to say what's right or wrong? God's in charge. An AA group need not be coerced by any human government over and above its own members. Their own experience, plus AA opinion in surrounding groups, plus God's prompting in their group conscience would be sufficient. Much travail, which means painful or laborious effort, has already taught us this. Okay, I'm pressing return and nothing's happening. There it is. So I just pulled out those three parts there. How an autonomous group in AA makes decisions, provided that they're open to the traditions, provided that these group members or these AA members forming this meeting are not just completely running on self-will and completely ignoring any of AA's traditions or literature and are just running with tradition 3, doing whatever they want. So ideally, a group would look at their own experience, what they've already done, what they've learned, how things have been going, what's working, what isn't working. AA opinion in surrounding groups. And again, there's a parallel with me as an individual. I'll look at what I know and what I've experienced through the 12 steps. I'll talk to my sponsors, some home group members, sponsees, other sober women to get an idea of where I might be headed next or what I need to do. And of course, seeking God. God's prompting in their group conscience. So that's assuming that this group is having regular group conscience meetings. And so, and I just made a note there, just as the individual isn't an island, neither are groups. I can't do it alone, but I alone must do it. So groups can be autonomous, but it's good for them to check in and be connected to other local groups. And that comes through involvement in the district and area, other levels of AA service, or there's some areas call it intergroup. We don't have intergroup here in Perth, so the structures are slightly different around the world. And so continuing from language of the heart, hence we may confidently say to each group, you should be responsible to no other authority than your own conscience. But my understanding is we're assuming that there's a group conscious, they've consulted with other groups and they're looking for the expression of God as he may express himself in their group conscience. Yet please note one important qualification. It will be seen that such extreme liberty of thought and action applies only to the group's own affairs. Rightly enough, this tradition goes on to say, so whether a group wants to be a 3-hour meeting or a 1-hour meeting or a 30-minute meeting, whether they want to make it an ID, a literature, whether they want to ring the bell after 2 minutes or 5 minutes or have a speaker, those kind of things each group can decide for themselves. So there's a lot of freedom and liberty about that. But when its plans affect other groups, those groups ought to be consulted. And so if someone's saying, okay, I'm going to start a meeting in this town on a Tuesday night, well, if there's already a meeting here on Tuesday night, I'd really want to go and speak to that group and discuss it with them, because that can affect their membership and their meeting as well. And would it be better to just join that meeting or invite them to join forces and so on? That's just one example. And so when people say all it takes is a resentment and a coffee pot to start a new meeting, I don't like that. I don't agree with that. That's just me, right? Again, God's in charge. People are going to do what they're going to do. But is that kind of thinking and attitude in line with unity, which comes first? Just a thought. Anyway, obviously, if any individual, group or regional committee could take an action that might seriously affect the welfare of Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole, or seriously disturb surrounding groups, that would not be liberty at all. It would be sheer license. It would be anarchy, not democracy. Therefore, we AAs have universally adopted the principle of consultation. So talk to each other, reason things out with someone else. This means that if a single AA group wishes to take any action that might affect surrounding group, it consults them, or if they don't feel they can go and talk to the surrounding groups, they go and talk to the intergroup or district or area committee for that area, if there be one. So whatever the structure is in your local area. And then likewise, if a group or regional committee wishes to take any action that might affect AA as a whole, it consults the trustees of the Alcoholic Foundation, who are, in effect, our overall General Service Committee. For instance, no group or intergroup could feel free to initiate without consultation any publicity that might affect AA as a whole, nor could it assume to represent the whole of AA by printing and distributing anything purporting to be AA standard literature. This same principle would naturally apply to all similar situations. Though there is no formal compulsion to do so, all undertakings of this general character are customarily checked with our AA General Headquarters. This idea is clearly summarised in the last sentence of Tradition 4, which observes, "On such issues, our common welfare is paramount." So our overall common welfare of AA is paramount there, just as common welfare of individual group members is important in Tradition 1. So I've just got a picture there of the group handbook. I thought this was relevant here. Obviously, there'll be different ones in the UK and US and wherever you are, but I just had this one handy. So we'll have a quick look at the Australian AA group handbook. So this talks about the AA group, where it all begins, how a group functions, how to get started. So this booklet, it states, this handbook is a suggested guide for setting up and running an AA group. More detailed information is available in the AA service manual, the guidelines, and other AA literature which cover group matters at greater depth. And there is that pamphlet, the AA group, which I had in WIM a couple of weeks ago. And so in all matters, the AA members can be guided by the three legacies of AA: recovery, unity, and service, which we've looked at in past weeks. So I'll just skip over them for now. And so we can see in the contents, what is a group? What's the difference between a meeting and a group? How do you become an AA member? The difference between open and closed meetings, naming a group, and so on. Positions, service within the group, the secretary, treasurer, GSR. Each group can have other service roles as well. Greeters are very important service positions in groups. And I don't know what it's like where you are, but here in Perth, the greeter seems to be almost an extinct species, sadly. But you know, we're trying to keep that going in our group, because I personally think it's very important. So highly recommend anyone go to the literature. I looked at these guidelines recently, and there were specific guidelines in there for speaking at schools, AA meetings in prisons, people working in the alcoholism field. I've been working in the alcoholism field for 10 years. I'm not sure I ever knew about these guidelines before. All I know is I went to an AA member who'd been working in the field, asked about her experience, and she said, "We've got no business working there." And it's like, actually, I found out all these years later, our literature gives us guidelines on what to do and how to do it, learned through the experience of other members. So I always recommend going to the literature, because everything, it's all been done before. Someone's already been there and they've recorded their experience, strength and hope, knowledge and understanding for us to benefit from. So continuing on, just looking at that contents page of the handbook, the principle of rotation, what is an informed group conscience, what happens at a group conscience meeting, the AA group inventory. That's a little bit different to those grapevine questions we've been looking at. Service sponsorship and so on. So it's all there. It's really good because sometimes what we hear in AA meetings is not actually in line with what's in our literature, what's in our three legacies. So more and more nowadays, I want to go to the literature. I want to see what does AA say about this, rather than some member who may or may not have the right information. And so on that note, let's have a look at the illustrated pamphlet. Hopefully it doesn't take me too long to get it up. I forgot to have that one ready for us. Illustrated pamphlet. 12 Traditions Illustrated. There it is. Thanks for your patience. Just my old laptop is old. Still waiting for this illustrated pamphlet to come up. Maybe I'll go on to the next thing and come back to that. All right, so Laurie, come on in, Laurie. Laurie has got a reading for us on Tradition 4. Thank you, Laurie.
Hey, Lori, alcoholic. Thanks so much for this meeting. Actually, you did mention something that I didn't really think that I had much to say personally on this topic. Being sober for just over 2 years, I haven't had nearly as much experience with, going to lots of different groups or anything like that. But actually, we did have an instance of one group deciding to start a meeting, and they didn't consult the other groups, and it coincided with another meeting. So there was kind of a little bit of an uproar about that. But this morning I found an article from the Grapevine that Bill W. wrote back in August of 1952. So I'm out of town and on my phone, so I'm sorry. I'm going to have to pull it up behind this. It covers the Tradition 4, so I'm going to read it. Hopefully y'all can hear me okay. It says, autonomy is a $10 word, but in relation to us, it means very simply that every AA group can manage its affairs exactly as it pleases, except when AA as a whole is threatened. Comes now the same question raised in Tradition 1. Isn't such liberty foolishly dangerous? Over the years, every conceivable deviation from our 12 steps and traditions has been tried. That was sure to be, since we are largely a band of ego-driven individualists. Children of chaos, we have defiantly played with every brand of fire, only to emerge unharmed and, we think, wiser. These very deviations created a vast process of trial and error, which under the grace of God has brought us to where we stand today. When AA traditions were first published in 1945, we had become sure that an AA group could stand almost any amount of battering. We saw that the group, exactly like the individual, must eventually conform to whatever tested principles would guarantee survival. We had discovered that there was perfect safety in the process of trial and error. So confident of this had we become, the original statement of AA tradition carried this significant sentence: any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that, as a group, they have no other affiliation. This meant, of course, that we had been given the courage to declare each AA group an individual entity strictly reliant on its own conscience as a guide to action. In charting this enormous expanse of freedom, we found it necessary to post only 2 storm signals. A group ought not to do anything which would greatly injure AA as a whole, nor ought it affiliate itself with anything or anybody else. or anybody else. There would be real danger should we commence to call some groups wet, others dry, still others Republican or communist, yet others Catholic or Protestant. The AA group would have to stick to its course or be hopelessly lost. Sobriety had to be its sole objective. In all other respects, there was perfect freedom of will and action. Every group had the right to be wrong. When AA was still young, lots of eager groups were forming. In a town we'll call Middleton, a real crackerjack had started up. The townspeople were hot as firecrackers about it. Stargazing, the elders dreamed of innovations. They figured the town needed a a great big alcoholic center, a kind of pilot plant AA groups could duplicate everywhere. Beginning on the ground floor, there would be a club. In the second story, they would sober up drunks and hand them currency for their back debts. The third deck would house an educational project. Quite non-controversial, of course. In imagination, the Gleaming Center was to go up several stories more, but 3 would do for a start. This would all take a lot of money, other people's money. Believe it or not, wealthy townsfolk bought the idea. There were, though, a few conservative dissenters among the alcoholics. They wrote the foundation, AA headquarters in New York, wanting to know about this sort of streamlining. They understood that the elders, just to nail things down good, were about to apply the foundation for a charter. These few were disturbed and skeptical. Of course, there was a promoter in the deal, a super promoter. By his eloquence, he allayed all fears, despite advice from the foundation that it could issue no charter, and that ventures which mixed an AA group with medication and education had come to sticky ends elsewhere. To make things safer, the promoter organized 3 corporations and became president of them all. Freshly painted, the new center shone. The warmth of it all spread through the town. Soon things began to hum. To ensure foolproof continuous operation, 61 rules and regulations were adopted. But alas, this bright scene was not long in darkening. Confusion replaced serenity. It was found that some drunks yearned for education, but doubted if they were alcoholics. The personality defects of others could be cured, maybe with a loan. Some were club-minded, but it was just a question of taking care of the lonely heart. Sometimes the swarming applicants would go for all 3 floors. Some would start at the top and come through the bottom, becoming club members. Others started in the club, pitched a binge, were hospitalized, then graduated to education on the 3rd floor. It was a beehive of activity, all right, but unlike a beehive, it was confusion compounded. An AA group as such simply couldn't handle this sort of project. All too late, that was discovered. Then came the inevitable explosion, something like that day the boiler burst in Wombley's clapboard factory. A chill choke, damp of fear and frustration fell over the group. When that lifted, a wonderful thing had happened. The head promoter wrote the foundation office. He said he'd wished he'd paid some attention to AA experience. Then he did something else that was to become an AA classic. It all went on a little card about a golf score size. The cover read, Middleton Group Number 1, Rule Number 62. Once the card was unfolded, a single pungent sentence leapt to the eye. Don't take yourself too damn seriously. Thus it was that under Tradition 4, an AA group had exercised its right to be wrong. Moreover, it had performed a great service for Alcoholics Anonymous because it had been humbly willing to apply the lessons it learned. It had picked itself up with a laugh and gone on to better things. Even the chief architect, standing in the ruins of his dreams, could laugh at himself. And that is the very acme of humility. Bill W.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laurie. What a great reading. So now if anyone's new, you know where that saying comes from. Rule number 62, don't take yourself so seriously. My sponsor always said, take the program seriously, but not yourself. And that was a really great reading. Again, thanks a lot, Laurie. And that just as the individual can do whatever you want, no one can tell you what to do. Groups are the same, but as Laurie read there's that enormous expanse of freedom, but 2 conditions. As long as we're not harming AA in any way, we need to consider that. Is this going to injure AA as a whole in any way? And that as a group, we're not affiliated with anyone or anything else. So the naming of groups, people need to be careful about that as well. What you call the group, that the name of the group, for example, my home group is at the Wesley Family Centre. We don't want to call it the Wesley Family Centre AA group because that could imply affiliation with that group. So our group name is the Rockingham People's Group. So we'll just have a little look at the illustrated pamphlet. So there's that picture there. two men and a woman sitting there. Someone's got a placard there, first things first. So wherever two or more alcoholics are gathered together to practice AA principles, it is an AA group, if they say it is. And there are all kinds of groups, little groups, and you say you are a member, and you are a member if you say you are. So it's very different to other groups or organisations where you might need to be sponsored in or meet certain membership criteria and so on, or pay annual membership fees and so on. And so there's big groups there and offbeat groups. So like-minded people can come together as well. And so there's a group that's got some sort of marching band. So let's have a look. I'll just see how long that reading is, whether I'll look at that. I don't want to be repeating anything we've already said. I'll just have a quick look at it. I will read this one because this always has a really nice slant to it, the illustrated pamphlet, and this one's quite short. A member who does any amount of travelling finds the AA spirit much the same everywhere, and I highly recommend anyone, if you have an opportunity to go to some AA meetings out of your local area, do that. It's just a wonderful experience to meet new friends that you haven't met before, which I feel like you've known them forever. But apart from this inward kinship, there are vast differences among groups. Here, the traveller finds three members discussing the steps in somebody's living room. There, 300 listening to speakers in a church auditorium. In one part of the US, respectful silence greets the speaker, who begins, "My name is Anne and I am an alcoholic." In another, everybody shouts happily, "Hi, Anne." And in many other places, she may introduce herself with her full name. At a 1-hour meeting or a 90-minute meeting in each neighbourhood in every part of the world reached by AA, the local group is free to work out its own customs. So some groups have the Serenity Prayer, some groups have the Lord's Prayer, some people have the responsibility statement. So it's wonderful that people can have that freedom and creativity and responsibility. And as the reading says, as always, freedom brings responsibility. Because each group is autonomous, it's up to each group to avoid any action that might harm AA. And there have been some actions, or this tradition would be unnecessary. Implicit throughout AA's traditions, Bill W. wrote, is the confession that our fellowship has its sins. We admit that we have character defects as a society, and these defects threaten us continually. Blown up to multiple size, the big ego may inspire one group to take over all the public information work for its area without consulting any of the other local groups. Once the group has decided we have all the answers, the lid's off. The group may then decide that, let's say, the 11th tradition is an outdated technicality. This is a competitive age. We're going to come right out and give AA some good, vigorous promoting. To the general public, this one conspicuous group is AA. Its antics reflect not only on the ignored neighbouring groups, but on the entire fellowship. In a way, the fourth tradition is like the fourth step. It suggests that the AA group should take honest inventory of itself, asking about each of its independently planned actions. Would this break any tradition? Like the individual member who chooses to make the steps his or her guide toward happy sobriety, the wise group recognises that the traditions are not hindering technicalities. They are proved guides towards the chief objective of all AA groups. So no one's trying to stop anyone having any fun or being creative or carrying the message as they see fit. They just want the best for AA as a whole, and for those alcoholics who have yet to find their way to our rooms. I think we're almost at the end. So we've just got these traditions questions. Can everyone see those traditions checklist inventory questions? Do I insist that there are only a few right ways of doing things in AA? Someone did call me a fundamentalist one time, but I do still try to keep an open mind. And for me, as I said, personally, I like to go to the literature more than anything. 2, does my group consider the welfare of nearby groups in its actions and decisions of AA as a whole? 3, do I judge or criticise other members' behaviour when it is different from mine, or do I learn from it? Everyone is my teacher in AA. 4, do I always bear in mind that to those outsiders who know I am in AA, I may to some extent represent our entire beloved fellowship? And that's certainly a massive responsibility, to think that anyone who knows I'm in AA is going to think, well, this is what everyone's like. So that's, massive pressure to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And 5, am I willing to help a newcomer go to any lengths, their lengths, not mine, to stay sober? That's a good question. Yeah, self-sacrifice, that's what it's about, not just convenience, doing what I want, when I feel like it. But as in accordance with the responsibility statement, being there whenever anyone anywhere reaches out for help. And the last question, do I ever criticise certain groups because I think they don't do things how I believe AA should be done? So really good questions for reflection there. That brings us to the end of my part of the workshop. So if anyone has any questions, comments, sharing, please come or put your hand up and we'll come to you, whoever's got their hand up first. Each group is autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. Hi, Nikki. Welcome back. Come on in.
Hi. Hi, I'm Nikki, an alcoholic. It's so good to be back. I miss you guys. The traditions are really new for me. And so I think this is brilliant to find out how groups operate. But my taking in this is like, I suppose on a selfish personal level. And I'm just seeing how this, how our affair, I had it in my head. It says we apply these things in all aspects of our life, all areas of our lives, the principles. So when I'm reading this, I'm thinking, oh gosh, do I criticize others? Do I criticize a group? Am I judgmental? Am I egotistical? So I'm applying it to myself. So that's a bit selfish on my behalf, but I'm applying it to because that's my limited experience. I haven't, I don't know how, I just attend groups and they're all functioning and tickety boo. I'm not part of, I'm a participant rather than somebody who created it. But these are all amazing principles. And the fact they had all this insight, and I'm just thinking like the founding members, how they all came together. There's a lot of legalistic terms in there as well. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's like there was a real band of, like, you had physicians, you had obviously somebody who was legalistic, legally minded, business minded, not publicity, but could express themselves eloquently well to put a message strongly across. And I'm just thinking, this is helping me to appreciate AA more. And I just want to leave it there, but I just think I'm applying it on a personal level at this stage, and to see it, how it filters through and how universal it is and how universal those principles are. It confirms to me that I think of inspired of the divine, because they're not confusing. They're not confusion. I think anything which is confusing can't be from the divine. I think the divine is very simple and loving and all and embracing. So if you've got a group like AA, an organisation, you can put that into practice and still allow people to have individual room to move, as long as it doesn't affect the welfare of others detrimentally, I think is amazing. It's very inspiring. And I'm learning a lot about myself as I go through it, like, oh, I've got to check myself on these. So that's a bit of a rambly share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikki, and good points. And absolutely, the traditions are there for us, or for me. I found them very, very helpful to take into my work environment, thinking about my primary purpose at work, principles above personalities at work. Who cares if I like someone or don't like someone? They're just doing their job just as I am trying to make a living. Unity, teamwork. How can I do that extra little bit just to make things easier for them, but they'll do that for me as well. And in relationships, there's many AA talks available on the internet that people have done about applying traditions in relationships, in the family. People use traditions in the family. And yeah, you mentioned, and the language of the heart has a lot of interesting stuff about the early days of AA, how there were conservatives and promoters, and the conservatives or go slow people would be like, okay, let's chew this over for a couple of weeks and a couple of months and batting it back and forward forever, just mulling it over and thinking it through. And then you've got the other people, the impulsive promoter types that just want to have a great idea and be inspired and jump to action right now. So between the two types of AA members, they, I guess, found the happy medium. And, you mentioned Lee, and Bill W., of course, was really a promoter, and, he did so much writing. And Bill Dotson, AA number 3, was a lawyer, and many of them were business folk as well, like Hank Parkhurst was a business person. So you're right, Nikki, I think as well, and I don't know specifically about the history, but there were business people, lawyers, promoters, all kinds of personalities. And this is the other thing, just before we go to Nancy, in AA, we do need, so outside of AA, people can have particular skills like secretarial skills or graphic design skills or maybe accounting skills, or they're good at chairing meetings. We welcome people to bring those skills into AA and use those skills, and because you can take on a service role in AA pretty much doing anything that suits you or interests you, and we learn by doing. This idea of thinking that you have to be around for a long time before you're going to be of any use or before you can do anything, we've got the cart before the horse. It's better to just jump in, especially if there's someone around who's been in service a little bit, who knows a little bit, who's been into the literature. It's the sooner you get into it, the better. That's been my experience. Welcome, Nancy.
Hi, Tuija. Great presentation for the Tradition 4. I loved it. So when I am talking about Tradition 4, I have to tell the story about this meeting called Happy Hour. So when I was newer in sobriety, I was hanging out with a bunch of young people. It was there's this it's sort of relevant, so I have to explain it. So there's this young people conference called the International Conference of Young People in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's known as IGPA. It's been happening for a really long time. You have to be under the age of 30, and they actually get young people involved in committee work, and then it sort of forces us to learn the traditions and the concepts and all of that stuff. We end up getting into service really young, and those are the people that become the future of AA, which is, I think, the whole idea of it in the beginning. But IGPA is still around. Anyways, I got involved in that when I was really new in sobriety, and we were the host committee for the conference that came to my town, Honolulu, where I was getting sober. And so we were learning about the traditions, and we had a bunch of elder statesmen who were sort of teaching us, yeah? And so when we got to Tradition 4, we were actually reading those questions, and we couldn't contain ourselves because we were so outraged by the behavior of this one particular group. It was called Happy Hour. It met 7 days a week, and it met at 5:30 in the afternoon, hence the name Happy Hour. But they broke every possible tradition. And that was so the folks that were helping us along, that's where they came into every group has a right to be wrong. And love and tolerance is our code. So that was where we were sort of urged to learn to be loving and tolerant, right? It's not just words that we say. We actually have to behave in a way that's loving and tolerant. Yeah. And so a group of us used to regularly attend this meeting just so we could practice having love and tolerance. And they would do stuff like, they met outside, for one thing. They met under this big banyan tree, and they had a microphone attached to a loudspeaker, so they totally broke everybody's anonymity. And then they would have people just sort of wander in from nowhere, often drunks, because it was on the edge of Waikiki, which is sort of the bar district, the nightclub district. And we would literally have drunk people in the meeting and then have to deal with them. And then the group itself decided to spend a bunch of money buying a car, which meant then they had to buy insurance and all this stuff. And it was just, we were like, everybody was outraged. So I have to report to you that meeting is still going. It's probably been there for 50 years. And love and tolerance is our code. Like that was like the whole district loves and tolerates happy hour. Yeah. It's like the example of what nobody else wants to do. It's just the craziest group. I mean, they do a lot of other stuff. Like they had a bleeding deacon for a really long time who would never let like they tried to have elected servants, but this guy would just control everything anyway. And so they just stopped having a secretary. And so people would just come up to the meeting. Whoever wanted to conduct the meeting that day, that's who would conduct the meeting. And anyway, that got out of hand a few times when like drunk people wanted to conduct the meeting. And love and tolerance, like that was like the district people said, there's nothing we can do about that group. They are autonomous and they have a right to be wrong. And that it was a really great lesson in how there is no one right way to do things. Yeah. And lots of people got sober out of that meeting. A lot of them didn't stay. They moved on to other meetings that had strong home groups and stuff like that. But some people, that was the source of their sobriety, and they were happy members of Alcoholics Anonymous. So anyway, I have to tell that story because that was a big part of me learning to understand Tradition 4. And, you know, like this group of friends that I had, that we would go there just to practice love and tolerance. So anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble.
Absolute gold. Thank you so much for that, Nancy. And wonderful to hear that story. And it just goes to show you it probably highly unlikely you'd get an opportunity to share that story that often in the meeting. It probably doesn't come up as you're sharing your story. So that's really valuable stuff. Thank you very much. So if there's no other hands, questions, comments, that was really a great story. And next week, I believe Valerie's going to do good to see you again, Jean. I've missed you. Good to see everyone. But next week, I believe Valerie is going to do a reading for us. I'll check in with Valerie and see if she's still up for that. So thanks again, Laurie, for your reading today. That was really good. And now we know where Rule 62 comes from. And that does bring us to the end of this week's session.